Resident Evil Requiem is coming out February 27th, 2026. It features a new protagonist to the mainline series, Grace Ashcroft. This isn't the first time we've heard of the surname Ashcroft in the franchise. In fact, Grace is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, who first appeared in a spin-off game called Resident Evil Outbreak. Released in Japan, America, and Europe on the PlayStation 2, Outbreak was the first game in the series to feature online multiplayer. However, only Japan and America had the servers to do so. Outbreak had a sequel called Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 released roughly a year later in the same 3 regions, and this time the European release had a server. Outbreak and File 2 are set during the Raccoon City incident just before Resident Evil 2 and 3. The main gist of the Outbreak games is that there are 5 levels called scenarios to go through, and you can choose these scenarios either in single player or multiplayer. In single player, you can either play solo or have 2 AI controlled characters alongside you, while in multiplayer you can play up to 4 players online. The official servers for both games has been inactive since 2007. Fortunately, there is a fan server called the Outbreak Server Resurrection, and majority of the footage you'll see in this video was played online with my sister. Also, I'll talk about the online experience later on. Now, before you start a scenario, you have to choose one of 8 playable characters. Of course, we have the one and only Alyssa Ashcroft, an investigative reporter for the Raccoon Press, Cindy Lennox, a waitress at Jack's Bar, the main location of the first scenario, David King, who's a plumber, George Hamilton, a doctor who worked at Raccoon Hospital, Jim Chapman, a railway employee, Kevin Ryman, a police officer who served in the Raccoon Police Department, Mark Wilkins, a security guard, and lastly, there's Yoko Suzuki, a college student who we later find out is a former Umbrella researcher. Each character has their own special ability and starting item. For example, Alyssa has lockpicks as a starting item, allowing her to unlock certain doors, cabinets, and lockers. She has 2 special abilities, one unique ability where she could backstep while aiming, allowing her to dodge enemy attacks, and the other ability is called Pod Shot, where Alyssa and also Kevin can deal extra damage with pistols after aiming for a certain amount of time. On top of that, each character has different amount of HP, movement speed, and virus rate, which I'll go through next. At the start of any scenario, each player is suffering from the T-virus, gradually infecting you over the course of time. This mechanic is basically a time limit, and you'll definitely run it out during your first playthrough. You can see how much you are infected by going into your status screen and looking at the bottom right. The virus gauge starts at 0% and goes up to 100%. If you get to 100, you'll turn into a zombie for a short period before dying. It's pretty much over if you're a zombie. You can't do much, but you can attack other players if you want to. Taking damage increases your virus gauge, and if your HP goes down to 0, your character will fall to a crawl, and the infection rate will drastically increase. Other players can pick you up to save you, although you'll be in an injured state. Also, there are items like herbs and antivirus pills that will stop the infection rate for a brief period. And the Dr. George can make antiviruses depending on the combination of herbs with his medical set. Next, let's talk about the online. Once you set everything you needed to go online, you'll gain access to the lobby, where you can host or join rooms. One thing you should know is, if you're hosting a room, you need to play through all the scenarios in single player once in order to make them available to play online. Alternatively, you could find a 100% save file which will skip the whole step, allowing you to host all the scenarios immediately. Once you've chosen your scenario, you then have to choose one of 4 difficulties: easy, normal, hard, and very hard. We decided to play on hard mode initially just for a little challenge, and then began the first scenario of the game called Outbreak. Taking place at Jack's Bar just moments before the Raccoon City incident, this scenario in my opinion is the perfect introduction to the game. In the opening cutscene, we see all 8 playable characters, and each character has their own unique scene in between, which is a nice touch. One of the bar's staff notices someone come in, but is acting strangely, so he checks up on them, and it turns out they were a zombie. The bar staff gets bitten, he pushes the zombie out of the bar, locking the door, and we're thrown into the gameplay as a swarm of zombies are trying to break in. The gameplay is just like the old Resident Evil games. It kinda reminds me of Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 0, both released a year prior to Outbreak. Each player will have their starting item plus 4 inventory slots, unless you're playing as Yoko, whose starting item will give you an extra 4 slots. You can give items to other players by presenting, and you can request any items from other players. You have access to a map of the surrounding area. It will only show rooms you've already visited, as well as any weapons, ammunition, and recovery items. If you do find a map in the scenario, it will be filled out entirely. Also, you can see the location of other players, but there are indicators on the map when a player is using the chat function, if a player is in a crawling state, or if a player is dead. In our first session, we couldn't complete the scenario. We had to get used to the controls, the mechanics, and our surroundings. But what really stopped our progress was the second floor of the bar. On that floor, there's a locked door, and we couldn't find the key to that door for the life of us. It didn't help that in this scenario, after a certain amount of time, the zombies will break into the bar. And once you fend off these zombies, you start to notice that they respawn. You can't run away because the zombies can enter into rooms. You can hide though, but don't forget we're infected, so we're on the clock. Eventually, you'll run out of resources and get overwhelmed by the zombies if you can't progress. So, where was the key, you may ask? Well, it was right under our noses underneath a newspaper in the main staff room. We searched everywhere. I even went back down to the first floor thinking I overlooked something. We even changed the difficulty to easy because the zombies hit so hard and we needed more time to search. The hard difficulty is no joke though, and despite not playing very hard, I can imagine it requires a lot of skill and experience. Interestingly, hard and very hard change the location of certain items entirely, and the type of enemies. Anyways, this is just scratching the surface of the scenario. Once we knew where the key was, we have to go through the liquor room, through a vent leading to the rooftop where we have to time your jump over to the adjacent building, take an elevator down and exit outside, help a police officer barricade zombies off by pushing police cars, escape with the police officer but one of the doors ahead is locked so we have to survive a swarm of zombies. Once we get through, the police officer gets caught off guard and drops a lighter. We see a fuel truck on top of a slope, so we grab the lighter, open the truck's valve, and light the fuel on fire, burning the remaining zombies. Blocked by the flames, we're forced to go down to the sewers and return back up to the surface where we meet another police officer who we evacuate with. We make some distance, but unfortunately there are too many roadblocks, and so we have to go on foot. At this point, we're at the end of the scenario. As we proceed to the footbridge, we see a gigantic horde of zombies filling the streets downtown, and some other police officers setting up explosives. However, they get overrun and fail to detonate it. Here we could take one of two endings. You could return back to the police officer and leave, or you could go down the footbridge, assemble the detonator and blow up the zombies. I took the quicker option, and that completes the first scenario. When you finish the scenario, each player will get a ranking grade based on how long you complete the scenario, as well as ranking points, which is based on several factors, like the difficulty you chose and completing various events during the scenario. These points can be used in the game's collection, where you can purchase various kinds of bonus content, for example, character art, character costumes, extra characters, soundtracks, and cutscenes. Going back to the online experience itself, this might sound obvious, but if you want to play an online classic Resident Evil, Outbreak is the game for you. The online is playable, of course it depends on the server, the host connection, etc. However, there is one consistent type of lag that happens in both games. For example, if 4 players were in a room together, one player is assigned what's called a room master, who basically sees the game without any lag, while the other players do. You'll see enemies teleport towards you if you're not the room master, which is insane, especially when you're fighting. Fortunately, there are ways to constantly stun enemies. It does require good timing and knowledge of enemy patterns. Usually, to become the room master, it's the person who enters the room first. So if players were in different rooms, they wouldn't see any lag at all. But there are specific situations where you're forced into one room. Another thing I want to talk about is the game's load times. They are dreadful, I'm not even exaggerating. It takes 10 seconds going through rooms, and that definitely kills the atmosphere and momentum. You can fix this by installing a virtual hard drive, very straightforward since there's a guide provided by the Resurrection server. If you were playing on actual hardware, you had to buy an official PlayStation 2 hard drive, and these were only compatible with the 30,000 and 50,000 PS2 models that had an expansion bay. This allowed you to install data that would reduce load times for certain PS2 games, mainly online, like Resident Evil Outbreak and Final Fantasy XI, but there were also some single-player games too. I can imagine someone who had a different PS2 model and had to suffer the load times. The PS2 hard drive came alongside with Final Fantasy XI in America, and in Europe, it came alongside with a PS2 copy of Linux. For this game, having a hard drive is mandatory. It definitely makes a difference, cutting the load times to 3 seconds or less. Which brings us to the rest of the scenarios. I don't want to drag the video too much longer, so I think it's best not to go in depth and spoil the scenarios. I'll let you guys experience it for yourselves, and if you can, there's plenty of videos online that you could watch that goes through the game as well. As mentioned earlier, each Outbreak game has 5 scenarios, and these scenarios aren't in chronological order. We just escaped from Jay's bar, and then in the next scenario, below freezing point, we're at Umbrella's underground laboratory suddenly. I'm like, what? Did I miss something? The other 3 scenarios, The Hive, Hellfire, and Decisions, takes place at Raccoon General Hospital, Apple Inn Hotel, and Raccoon University respectively. In File 2, we have Wild Things, Underbelly, Flashback, Desperate Times, and End of the Road, taking place at Raccoon Zoo, Raccoon City Subway, Raccoon Forest, Raccoon Police Department, and Umbrella Corp Research and Development Center respectively. The reason why the scenarios are out of place was because Resident Evil Outbreak was supposed to have the other 5 scenarios from File 2. but due to deadlines, they couldn't complete those scenarios in time before Outbreak's release and therefore were split into 2 games. Additionally, there are some unreleased scenarios that didn't make the cut. For example, one scenario takes place at Raccoon Docks. Despite not being in chronological order, the fans has taken upon themselves to place these scenarios roughly in order. When you go through the scenarios, you'll notice that some characters makes an appearance. For example, Below Freezing Point features Yoko and Wild Things feature Cindy. They usually appear at the opening scene of the scenario, and during the scenario they are an NPC. If you didn't pick them as your character, they are scripted to die or turn into a zombie. It doesn't affect the story or scenario, but it does hint at you to play as them as they are the canon character of that scenario. Sometimes there's a scenario where they should be a canon character, but there isn't. For example, as mentioned earlier, the scenario Underbelly takes place at a subway, and Jim, who works for the subway, doesn't appear in that scenario. If you do play as him in this scenario specifically, you'll gain some benefits like knowing the layout of the subway immediately. Even though there were only 10 scenarios, I didn't feel like any of them were too short to complete, and the final scenario in both games are a bit longer since they are the grand finale. I enjoyed playing through the new location both games introduced. There were also locations you may recognize like Umbrella's underground laboratory and the Raccoon Police Department that either had completely new areas or limited areas to explore. Overall, Outbreak was an ambitious series, going through the trials and errors of online multiplayer for one of their beloved franchises. It didn't turn out the way that the developers intended to, but the 2 games has a ton of replayability with a combination of characters and difficulty and the bonus content to unlock. There are character-specific endings, characters have access to certain files in certain scenarios, and there are unique cutscenes that depends on the difficulty, for example. I didn't play much of the single player, so I can't say much about the AI. From what I experienced, they are finicky and unreliable to use. There is an unlockable mode called Lone Wolf that lets you play solo without any AI if you want to avoid the headache dealing with them. I recommend playing Resident Evil Outbreak and File 2 if you can, and shoutouts to the Outbreak server resurrection for allowing us to experience the online multiplayer. I'm excited for Resident Evil Requiem. I can't wait to play as Grace Ashcroft and Leon S. Kennedy, who was recently announced to be a playable character. According to an interview with one of the producers, Masamoto Kumazawa, you don't need to play Outbreak to enjoy Requiem, but it is nice to know the story of the survivors in the Raccoon City incident. And apparently, there may be some Outbreak references here and there, maybe a character appearance, who knows? And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the final video of 2025. I didn't upload as many videos this year since I want to move away from the everything you need to know videos and also dealing with life in general. I've got many ideas for next year, for example, covering the final Parasite Eve game, The Third Birthday, and let's not forget Cal Hyde and Last Window, The Secret of Cape West. Maybe I'll review some games for consistency. I haven't done it before on this channel because I'm a bit inexperienced and I still feel that way, but you gotta start somewhere, right? Thank you for those who support this channel, I am deeply grateful. If you do like this content, be sure to check out the channel, like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you next year and catch you guys later. Take care.